Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we present 7 deeply disturbing true road trip horror stories that will make you reconsider every highway journey you have ever taken. These are not works of fiction, but authentic accounts from travelers who experienced something terrifying on the open road. Each story has been gathered from first-hand witnesses who lived through these harrowing encounters and were willing to share their experiences so others might avoid similar fates. The roads and highways we trust to carry us safely can harbor dangers we never anticipate. From predators who hunt along remote stretches to phenomena that defy rational explanation. If you appreciate genuine horror content rooted in reality, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the most chilling true stories. After you hear these disturbing accounts, share your own unsettling travel experiences in the comments below. We want to build a community where people can warn others about the dangers that lurk beyond the headlights. Now prepare yourself as we journey into 7 encounters that transformed ordinary road trips into living nightmares. Aurora had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight when she felt the familiar pressure in her bladder that she could no longer ignore. The interstate stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkening landscape of rural Nevada. She had left Sacramento that morning with a carefully planned route that would take her all the way to Denver. A solo cross-country road trip she had been planning for months. At 28 years old, Aurora prided herself on her independence and her ability to handle whatever challenges came her way. She had driven long distances alone before, always prepared with a full tank of gas, a charged phone, and a general awareness of her surroundings. But nothing in her previous experience would prepare her for what was about to unfold at the next rest stop. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind that peculiar twilight that makes everything look slightly unreal. Her dashboard clock read 9:17 p.m. when she spotted the brown rest area sign reflecting in her headlights. The next exit was not for another 40 miles according to her GPS, and Aurora knew she could not wait that long. She flicked on her turn signal, though there was no other traffic to signal to, and guided her silver Honda Accord down the exit ramp. The rest stop was one of those older facilities that state highway departments had built decades ago and seemed to have forgotten about. The parking lot was poorly lit by just 3 overhead lights, 2 of which flickered intermittently as if they might give up entirely at any moment. There were only 2 other vehicles in the lot. A semi-truck parked in the designated truck area with its lights off, and a dark pickup truck sitting alone near the bathroom facilities. Aurora pulled into a spot under the functioning light, positioning her car so she would have a clear path to exit if needed. It was a habit she had developed from reading too many true crime stories online, always thinking about escape routes and situational awareness. She grabbed her keys, making sure to lock the doors with the key fob as she walked toward the concrete building that housed the restrooms. The night air was cooler than she expected, and she wished she had grabbed her jacket from the back seat. The building itself was a standard rest stop design. Cinder block construction painted a faded beige with separate entrances for men and women, and a covered area between them with vending machines and a map of the state behind scratched plexiglass. As she approached the women's restroom entrance, Aurora became aware of how quiet everything was. There was no sound of traffic from the highway above, no crickets or nightbirds. Just an unsettling silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. She pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. Immediately hit by the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with something vaguely unpleasant underneath. The fluorescent lights hummed. Overhead, that distinctive sound that seemed louder in the absence of any other noise. She quickly used the facilities, washed her hands with water that ran ice cold regardless of which tap she turned, and headed back outside. That was when she noticed the dark pickup truck had moved. It was now parked directly next to her Honda, so close that she would barely be able to open her driver's side door. Aurora stopped walking, a cold feeling spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the night air. The parking lot had at least 30 empty spaces, yet this vehicle had chosen to park inches from her car. She could see now that it was a black or dark blue Dodge Ram with tinted windows and a lifted suspension. The engine was running. A low rumble that she could feel as much as hear, and a thin stream of exhaust drifted from the tailpipe into the night air. Aurora changed direction, walking toward the vending machines instead of her car, pulling out her phone as if she had just remembered she needed to check something. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pretended to scroll through her screen. But she was actually opening her camera app, getting ready to take a photo of the truck and its license plate if necessary. From her peripheral vision, she could see that someone was sitting in the driver's seat of the pickup, a large shape that was too dark to make out any details through the tinted windows. The person was not moving, not getting out, just sitting there with the engine running. Several minutes passed. Aurora stood by the vending machines, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it must be visible through her shirt. She was trying to decide on her next move when the driver's side door of the pickup finally opened. A man stepped out, and even in the poor lighting, Aurora could tell he was tall and heavily built, wearing jeans and a dark hooded sweatshirt despite the mild temperature. He did not look in her direction immediately, instead walking around the front of his truck as if inspecting something. Then he turned and looked directly at her. "Evening," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "Nice night for a drive." Aurora nodded but did not respond verbally, clutching her phone tighter. The man started walking toward her, not quickly but with a purposeful stride that made her stomach clench. She glanced toward the semi-truck, hoping to see signs of life, a driver who might be awake and aware of what was happening. But the cab remained dark and silent. She was alone with this stranger in a rest stop miles from anywhere, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to run. "You traveling alone?" the man asked as he got closer. She could see his face now, probably mid-40s with a few days of stubble and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about her. "That is a long way to drive by yourself." "My husband is in the truck," Aurora lied, gesturing vaguely toward the semi as if she were a long-haul trucker's wife. "Just stretching my legs while he sleeps." The man stopped walking, standing about 15 feet away from her now. He looked over at the semi-truck, then back at her, and smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. It was a smile that said he knew she was lying, that he knew exactly what her situation was, and that he found her attempt at deception amusing. "Funny," he said, his voice taking on a different tone, something harder underneath the casual friendliness. "I have been parked here for about 20 minutes, and I have not seen anyone else around, just you pulling up in that silver Honda over there. You know, it is not safe for a woman to be driving alone at night. Bad things can happen." Aurora's fight-or-flight response kicked into overdrive. She did not respond to his comment, instead making a sudden decision and walking quickly toward her car. Her keys were already in her hand, the unlock button within reach of her thumb. The man did not try to stop her, but he did not move out of the way either, forcing her to walk a wide arc around him. She could feel his eyes tracking her every movement. "Hey, where are you going?" he called after her. "I am just trying to have a conversation. No need to be rude." Aurora reached her car and managed to get the driver's side door open, despite the limited space between her Honda and the pickup truck. She slid inside and immediately hit the lock button, her hands fumbling as she tried to get the key into the ignition. The man had started walking toward her car now, moving faster than before. She could see him in her rearview mirror, approaching with that same purposeful stride. The key finally slid home, and she started the engine, throwing the car into reverse without even checking behind her. The Honda shot backward, and she cranked the wheel hard, causing the car to swing around. She shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator, her tires squealing slightly on the pavement as she headed for the exit. In her rearview mirror, she could see the man standing in the parking lot, watching her leave, his hands in the pockets of his hooded sweatshirt. Then, just as she thought she was clear, she saw the headlights of the pickup truck come on. Aurora merged back onto the interstate, pressing the accelerator harder than she normally would, watching her speedometer climb to 85 miles per hour. She kept checking her mirrors, hoping to see empty road behind her. But within a minute, she spotted the distinctive high-mounted headlights of the pickup truck coming up fast. The truck moved into the left lane and pulled alongside her, matching her speed exactly. Aurora could not see the driver through the tinted windows, but she knew it was him. She accelerated more, pushing her Honda up to 90, then 95. The pickup kept pace effortlessly, its powerful engine clearly superior to her four-cylinder. For the next 40 miles, the pickup stayed with her. Sometimes it would drop back, disappearing from her mirrors just long enough for hope to flutter in her chest. Then the headlights would reappear, closing the distance once again. Other times, it would pull alongside her in the left lane, pacing her perfectly for miles at a time. Aurora tried everything she could think of. She slowed down to 60, hoping he would get bored and pass her. But the pickup slowed too. She took an exit ramp at the last possible second without signaling, hoping to lose him. But the pickup followed, his tires protesting the sudden maneuver. Back on the highway, the pursuit continued. Aurora's phone was in the passenger seat, and she knew she should call 911. But she was terrified to take even one hand off the wheel at the speed she was traveling. Her gas gauge was starting to drop into the lower quarter, and she realized with growing panic that she would have to stop eventually. The pickup driver seemed to know this too, maintaining his presence like a predator waiting for its prey to tire. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes, Aurora saw the lights of a large truck stop ahead. Not a rest area this time, but a proper commercial facility with a gas station, restaurants, and multiple buildings lit up like a beacon in the night. She took the exit without signaling, and to her immense relief, the pickup continued on the highway. She glanced in her rearview mirror and saw the high-mounted headlights disappearing into the distance. Aurora pulled into the truck stop and parked directly in front of the main building under the brightest lights available, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear. She sat there for several minutes, trying to catch her breath, watching the entrance road to make sure the pickup did not reappear. When she finally felt stable enough to move, she grabbed her phone and went inside, heading straight for the counter where a tired-looking clerk was restocking cigarettes. "I need to call the police," Aurora said, her voice cracking slightly. "Someone followed me from a rest stop about 40 miles back." The clerk looked up, immediately alert. "Are they still following you?" "I do not think so. I lost them when I pulled in here." The clerk picked up the phone and called the local highway patrol. Within 20 minutes, a state trooper arrived, a middle-aged officer named Rodriguez, who took her statement seriously. Aurora described everything: the man at the rest stop, his invasive questions, the way he had parked so close to her car, the 40-mile pursuit at high speeds. Officer Rodriguez took notes, nodding occasionally. his expression growing more concerned as she talked. "You did the right thing stopping here," he said when she finished. "And you were smart not to take another isolated exit. Can you describe the vehicle?" Aurora gave him all the details she could remember about the dark pickup truck, though she had to admit she had been too focused on driving to get a clear look at the license plate. Rodriguez made a radio call, sending the description to other units patrolling the area. Then he turned back to her. "I am going to be straight with you," he said. "This stretch of highway has had some problems. We have had reports of similar incidents, though usually the suspects give up after a few miles. The fact that this one followed you for 40 miles is concerning. I do not want you getting back on the road alone tonight. Is there somewhere you can stay until morning?" Aurora nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes for the first time. The officer's concern made everything feel suddenly very real. The danger she had been in clicking into place in a way it had not, while she was focused on just surviving. "There is a hotel right here. I saw the sign." "Good. I will escort you over there and make sure you get checked in safely. And I am going to have a unit patrol this area for the next few hours, just to be safe." Officer Rodriguez was true to his word. He followed her car across the truck stop complex to the attached hotel, waited while she checked in, and walked her to her room on the second floor. He gave her his card and made her promise to call if she saw anything suspicious. Aurora locked herself in the room, pushed a chair against the door, even though she knew it was probably unnecessary, and finally allowed herself to break down. She did not sleep that night. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every pair of headlights in the parking lot visible through her curtains made her heart race. She kept replaying the encounter in her mind, thinking about all the ways it could have gone worse. What if the man had blocked her car so she could not leave the rest stop? What if there had been no truck stop with its bright lights and people? What if the pickup driver had not given up the chase? The next morning, Aurora called her sister in Denver and told her everything. Her sister wanted her to abandon the trip and fly home, but Aurora refused. She was not going to let fear control her life, even though she knew she would never look at rest stops the same way again. Before she got back on the road, she went to a sporting goods store and bought a canister of pepper spray, which she kept in her cup holder for the rest of the journey. She made it to Denver without incident, but the experience changed her in ways she had not anticipated. She found herself unable to drive long distances alone anymore, always needing someone with her in the car. She avoided rest stops entirely, only stopping at well-lit, busy gas stations. And sometimes, even years later, when she was driving at night and saw headlights pull up behind her, her hands would start to shake and her heart would race. And she would be back in that moment on the Nevada interstate, being hunted by a stranger whose motives she could only imagine. Aurora never found out who the man was or why he had targeted her. Officer Rodriguez called her a few weeks later to say they had investigated several similar complaints and had a few suspects under surveillance, but no arrests were made. The mystery of that night remained unsolved. Just another story of a woman who trusted her instincts, made the right decisions, and survived something that could have ended very differently. She shared her experience online, hoping to warn other solo travelers, especially women, about the dangers that can lurk at isolated rest stops. The response was overwhelming, with dozens of others sharing similar encounters, all of them variations on the same terrifying theme. Predators who hunted the lonely stretches of America's highways looking for vulnerable targets. To this day, Aurora tells anyone who will listen to trust their gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone's behavior makes you uncomfortable, do not worry about being rude or polite. Your safety matters more than social niceties. And never, ever assume that something bad cannot happen just because you are in a public place. Sometimes the most dangerous encounters happen in the spaces between civilization, where the lights are dim and help is far away. Nicholas had never believed in ghosts. At 32 years old, he considered himself a rational person, someone who relied on logic and evidence rather than superstition and folklore. He worked as an accountant, spent his weekends hiking and reading, and generally lived a life that was predictable and grounded in reality. That perspective changed completely on a cold October night when he was driving home from his parents' house in rural Vermont. A journey that should have been unremarkable, but instead became something he would never be able to fully explain or forget. The visit had run later than Nicholas intended. His mother had insisted on serving dessert after dinner. Then his father wanted to show him some old photographs they had recently discovered in the attic. And before Nicholas knew it, the clock was approaching midnight. He said his goodbyes and headed out to his car, a reliable Toyota Camry that had never given him any problems. The night was unusually cold for early October, with temperatures already dropping near freezing, and a thick fog had rolled in from the surrounding mountains, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet in any direction. Nicholas started the engine and pulled out of his parents' driveway, heading toward Route 7, which would take him the 30 miles back to his apartment in Burlington. The two-lane highway was completely empty at this hour, winding through dense forests and past the occasional darkened farmhouse. The fog seemed to grow thicker as he drove, his headlights barely penetrating the murky whiteness that pressed against his windshield. He slowed to about 40 miles per hour, well below the posted speed limit, focusing intently on the center line to keep himself oriented. He had been driving for approximately 20 minutes, putting him roughly halfway home, when his headlights caught something on the shoulder of the road ahead. As Nicholas got closer, he could make out the figure of a person standing on the side of the highway, thumb extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. The figure appeared to be a young woman, wearing what looked like a white or pale-colored dress that seemed far too light for the temperature. Nicholas's first instinct was to keep driving. He had heard all the warnings about picking up hitchhikers, the dangers of letting strangers into your vehicle, especially on a deserted road in the middle of the night. But as he passed by, he caught a glimpse of her face in his headlights. She looked young, perhaps in her early 20s, with long dark hair that hung wet against her face and shoulders. She was shivering visibly, her arms wrapped around herself, and the expression on her face was one of desperate pleading. Nicholas felt his foot move to the brake almost involuntarily. He could not just leave someone stranded out here in this fog and cold. Whatever the risks, he could not live with himself if he read about someone freezing to death on this stretch of road and knew he had driven past without helping. He pulled over about 20 feet beyond where she stood and watched in his rearview mirror as she hurried toward his car. He unlocked the passenger door and she pulled it open, sliding quickly into the seat beside him. A wave of cold air came with her, and Nicholas immediately noticed that she was soaking wet, as if she had been standing in the rain, though it was not raining and had not been all evening. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice soft and slightly hoarse. "I did not think anyone would stop." "What are you doing out here?" Nicholas asked, reaching back to grab a blanket he kept in the back seat for emergencies. "Here, wrap this around yourself. You are freezing." She took the blanket gratefully, pulling it tight around her shoulders. Up close, Nicholas could see that her dress was indeed white. A simple cotton sundress that would have been appropriate for a warm summer day, but was completely inadequate for an October night in Vermont. Her feet were bare, he noticed with alarm, pale and muddy, as if she had been walking along the roadside for some time. "My car broke down," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. "A few miles back. I have been trying to get help, but no one has any cell service out here." Nicholas nodded. That made sense. This area was notorious for dead zones where cell towers could not reach. "Where do you need to go?" She gave him an address in a small town called Fairhaven, about 20 miles ahead on his route. Nicholas knew the area vaguely, a collection of old houses clustered around a single main street, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for the past 100 years. "I can take you there," Nicholas said, putting the car back in drive and pulling onto the highway. "No problem at all." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the fog continuing to swirl around them. Nicholas kept glancing over at his passenger, noting details that struck him as increasingly odd. Despite the blanket, she did not seem to be warming up at all. Her skin remained pale, almost translucent in the dim light from the dashboard. The water from her hair and dress was dripping onto his car seat, creating a small puddle, but she did not seem to notice or care. "So, what were you doing out here?" Nicholas asked, trying to make conversation to ease the strangeness of the situation. "Pretty isolated place for a breakdown." "I was visiting someone," she said, her voice distant and oddly flat. "But I need to get home now. It is important." "Do you live with your family at that address?" She turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Nicholas felt an involuntary chill run down his spine. Her eyes were unusual, a very pale blue that seemed almost colorless in the darkness of the car. "Yes," she said simply. "They will be waiting for me." Nicholas decided not to push the conversation further. There was something about the young woman that was making him increasingly uncomfortable, though he could not put his finger on exactly what it was. He told himself it was just the unusual circumstances, the late hour, the oppressive fog, his own fatigue from a long day. But some part of his mind was registering that things were not quite right, that the situation had elements that did not add up. He reached forward and turned on the radio, hoping some music would make the atmosphere less tense. Static crackled from the speakers, the signal unable to penetrate the mountains and fog. He cycled through the channels, but found nothing except more static. Finally, he shut it off, and they continued in silence. After about 10 minutes, Nicholas glanced in his rearview mirror to check the road behind them. The mirror showed only fog and darkness, his taillights barely visible in the murk. Then he looked at the passenger seat beside him, intending to ask the young woman if she was feeling any warmer. The words died in his throat. The passenger seat was empty. The blanket lay crumpled on the seat, still damp. But the young woman was gone. Nicholas felt his heart begin to pound. He looked around wildly, checking the back seat, though he had heard no sound of her climbing over. The car was empty, except for him. He was absolutely certain he had not stopped the car, had not pulled over, had not even slowed down. The doors had never opened. He would have heard that, would have felt the rush of cold air. But somehow, impossibly, his passenger had vanished. His hands shaking, Nicholas pulled off onto the shoulder of the road, throwing the car into park. He turned on the interior light and examined the passenger seat. The damp spot where she had been sitting was still there, water soaking into the fabric. The blanket was wet where she had wrapped it around herself. But the young woman had simply disappeared, as completely as if she had never been there at all. Nicholas got out of the car, looking up and down the highway, calling out into the fog. "Hello? Are you out there? Where did you go?" His voice sounded small and swallowed by the thick air. There was no response, no movement, nothing but the oppressive silence of the empty road. He got back in the car, his mind racing through possible explanations. Could she have jumped out while he was not paying attention? But he would have heard the door, felt the change in the car's movement. Could he have imagined the entire encounter? But the wet seat and damp blanket proved she had been real, that something had happened. Nicholas sat there for several minutes, trying to calm his breathing, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Finally, he decided to continue driving to the address she had given him. Maybe there was an explanation there. Maybe she had family who could tell him what had happened. It took another 15 minutes to reach Fairhaven, the fog finally beginning to lift as he entered the small town. He found the street name easily enough and drove slowly down it, looking for the house number the young woman had specified. The house was a small Victorian-style home, well-maintained with a neat yard and a porch light glowing warmly in the darkness. Nicholas pulled into the driveway, shut off his engine, and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. How exactly was he going to explain this? That he had picked up a hitchhiker who had then vanished from his moving car? It sounded insane even to him. He walked up to the front door and rang the bell. After a minute, the porch light brightened, and the door opened to reveal an elderly couple, both probably in their 70s, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The man was wearing a bathrobe over pajamas, and the woman had clearly been preparing for bed. "I am so sorry to bother you this late," Nicholas began, suddenly feeling very foolish. "But something very strange just happened to me, and I think it involves your house." "Come in, please," the elderly woman said, her expression kind despite the late hour. "You look like you have seen a ghost." The unintentional accuracy of that statement hit Nicholas hard, but he followed them inside to a cozy living room, filled with old furniture and family photographs. The couple introduced themselves as Robert and Margaret Henshaw, and they listened patiently as Nicholas tried to explain what had happened. He described picking up the young woman, the white dress, the wet hair, her request to come to this address, and then her impossible disappearance from his car. As he talked, he watched the color drain from Margaret's face. Robert reached over and took his wife's hand, squeezing it gently. When Nicholas finished, there was a long moment of silence. "What did she look like?" Margaret asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas described the young woman as best he could. Early 20s, long dark hair, pale blue eyes, wearing a white sundress. As he spoke, Margaret stood up and walked to the fireplace mantel, picking up a framed photograph. She brought it back, handed it to Nicholas with trembling hands. The photograph showed a young woman who matched his description exactly, down to the unusual pale blue eyes and the long dark hair. She was wearing a white sundress in the photo, smiling at the camera with a carefree expression that seemed to belong to another world. "That is her," Nicholas said, his voice cracking. "That is exactly who I picked up." "Who is she?" Margaret sat down heavily, tears beginning to stream down her face. Robert spoke quietly, his own voice thick with emotion. "That is our daughter, Emily. She died 15 years ago on October 13th. She was coming home from a party when her car went off the road into Miller's Creek, about a mile from where you said you picked her up. She was wearing that white dress. They did not find her body until the next morning." Nicholas felt the room spin around him. He looked at the photograph again, at the young woman who had sat in his car, who had been solid and real enough to drip water onto his seat, who had spoken to him in a voice he could still hear in his mind. "But that is impossible," he managed to say. "She was real. She was in my car. I gave her a blanket. You are not the first, Robert said quietly. Over the years, maybe 5 or 6 other drivers have stopped by, all with the same story. They pick up a young woman in a white dress on Route 7, always on October 13th, always around midnight. She asks to be brought here, and she always disappears before they arrive. Margaret wiped her eyes. We think she is trying to come home. She died so close, just a mile away. Maybe she does not know she is gone, or maybe she is determined to make it back one more time. We have learned to accept it, though it breaks our hearts every time. Nicholas stayed for another hour, listening to them talk about their daughter, about the anniversary of her death that came every year, about the strange phenomenon that neither science nor logic could explain. When he finally left, the elderly couple gave him the photograph to keep, telling him that Emily would want him to have it, that he had tried to help her, and that meant something. Nicholas drove the rest of the way home in a daze. The wet spot on his passenger seat slowly dried, but the experience remained vivid and undeniable. He kept the photograph on his desk, a reminder that the world contained mysteries that could not be easily explained, that sometimes the impossible reached out and touched the ordinary world in ways that changed everything you thought you knew. He never picked up another hitchhiker, and every October 13th, he found himself thinking about Emily Henshaw, wondering if she was still out there on that foggy stretch of Route 7, still trying to make it home to the parents who had never stopped waiting for her return. The rationale part of Nicholas's mind still struggled to accept what had happened, but the evidence was undeniable. He had encountered something beyond normal experience, and it had shaken the foundations of everything he thought he understood about reality. Ellie and Adam had been together for 3 years and prided themselves on being adventurous travelers. They preferred back roads to highways, small towns to cities, and the kind of spontaneous detours that often led to their best memories. So when their GPS lost signal somewhere in the Appalachian backroads of eastern Kentucky, neither of them was particularly worried. They had a paper map in the glove compartment, a full tank of gas, and the kind of confidence that comes from having navigated difficult terrain before. What they did not have was any preparation for what they were about to encounter in the mountains that afternoon. They had left Lexington that morning, heading toward a small cabin they had rented near the Virginia border. The plan was to spend a long weekend hiking and disconnecting from their busy lives in Cincinnati. Adam was driving their Jeep Cherokee, and Ellie was in the passenger seat, trying to get their GPS to recalculate their route. The paved road they had been following for the past hour had gradually narrowed, and now they found themselves on what appeared to be a single-lane path, barely wide enough for their vehicle. "I think we should turn around," Ellie said, looking at the dense forest pressing in on both sides of the road. The trees were old growth, massive oaks and pines that blocked out much of the afternoon sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. "Let me just see where this goes," Adam replied, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he navigated around a particularly deep pothole. "It has to connect to something eventually." They continued for another 10 minutes, the road deteriorating from rough pavement to gravel to what was essentially just packed dirt with weeds growing down the center. Then, as they came around a sharp bend, they saw the settlement. It was not marked on any map, not indicated by any sign, just a collection of perhaps a dozen structures that appeared to emerge from the forest itself. The buildings were small, mostly wooden cabins and shacks in various states of disrepair. Some had roofs that sagged dangerously. Others had walls patched with mismatched materials. There was no visible power lines, no satellite dishes, no cars or modern vehicles of any kind. Scattered between the buildings were objects that Ellie and Adam could not immediately identify. strange arrangements of sticks bound together with what looked like rope or twine, symbols carved into tree trunks, and items hanging from branches that might have been wine chimes, but created no sound in the still air. What was most unsettling was the people. As the Jeep rolled slowly into the settlement, Ellie and Adam became aware of figures standing motionless on porches and in doorways. Men, women, and children, all dressed in clothing that seemed decades out of style. All watching the vehicle with expressions that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. No one waved. No one called out. No one moved. They simply stared with an intensity that made Ellie's skin crawl. "Adam, we need to leave," she said quietly, as if afraid the watchers might hear her through the closed windows. "Right now." "I am trying," Adam muttered. He had slowed the Jeep to a crawl, looking for a place wide enough to turn around. But the settlement seemed to have been built along a narrow passage between the trees, with barely enough room for one vehicle to pass through. The buildings on either side created a corridor that offered no space to maneuver. As they continued forward, more details became apparent. The symbols carved into the trees were not random marks, but deliberate patterns, repeated throughout the settlement. Some resembled crosses, others were circular designs with radiating lines, and still others were completely unfamiliar. Hanging from one particular tree was what appeared to be a collection of dolls made from corn husks and sticks, their crude faces painted with what Ellie hoped was just red paint. A child stood in the doorway of one cabin, a girl no more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing a faded dress that might have been blue once, but had faded to an indeterminate gray. She held something in her arms that looked like a small animal, possibly a rabbit. But as the Jeep passed closer, Ellie realized with horror that whatever the child was holding was not alive. It had been dead for some time, yet the girl cradled it tenderly, rocking it like a baby, her blank eyes never leaving the vehicle. "What is this place?" Ellie whispered, though she was not sure she wanted an answer. Nothing about the settlement felt right. It was as if they had driven through some invisible barrier and emerged in a different time, or perhaps a different reality altogether. The silence was profound and unnatural. There were no sounds of birds, no insects, no wind rustling through the trees. Even the Jeep's engine seemed muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the noise. Adam finally found a slightly wider area where the road curved, and he began the delicate process of turning the vehicle around. It required several back-and-forth maneuvers, and with each reversal, Ellie felt certain that the watching figures would move, would approach, would do something. But they remained perfectly still, their eyes tracking the Jeep's every movement with an attention that felt predatory. As Adam completed the turn and started driving back the way they had come, Ellie noticed something that made her breath catch. The road ahead of them, the same road they had just traveled to reach the settlement, looked different. The trees seemed denser, the path more overgrown, as if it had not been used in years. But that was impossible. They had driven this exact route just minutes earlier. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "It has to be," Adam said, but he did not sound certain. "We did not pass any other turns." They drove for what felt like much longer than the 10 minutes it had taken them to reach the settlement. And yet, they did not emerge onto the gravel road they remembered. Instead, the path seemed to loop back on itself, and suddenly they were approaching the settlement again from a slightly different angle. The same buildings appeared through the trees, the same watching figures stood motionless in their positions. "This is not happening," Adam said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We are going in circles." Ellie pulled out her phone, knowing it was useless, but checking anyway. No signal, and the GPS showed only their blue location dot floating in a gray void, with no roads, no landmarks, nothing to indicate where they were. The battery was at 18%, she noticed, which did not make sense. It had been fully charged less than an hour ago. They tried a different route, taking what appeared to be a branching path to the left. This led them past more of the strange, carved symbols and into an area where the trees grew so close together that their branches scraped against the sides of the Jeep. The path ended abruptly at a wall of vegetation so thick it was impassable. Adam reversed carefully, and once again they found themselves back in the settlement, as if the forest itself was funneling them back to this place. This time, something had changed. One of the figures had moved closer to the road. It was an elderly man, gaunt and stooped, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. His face was deeply lined, weather-beaten, and his eyes were a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to look through rather than at them. As the Jeep approached, he raised one skeletal hand and pointed to the right, toward a gap between two buildings that Ellie had not noticed before. Adam stopped the Jeep, and for a long moment they sat frozen, unsure what to do. The old man did not speak, did not move except for that pointing hand, steady and insistent. Finally, Adam made a decision and slowly steered the vehicle in the direction the man indicated. As they passed him, Ellie looked directly at his face, and the old man spoke, his voice a dry rasp that somehow carried clearly through the closed window. "Leave before dark," he said. "Do not come back." The gap between the buildings opened into a narrow trail that looked barely navigable. Branches scraped along the roof and sides of the Jeep, and Adam had to drive with excruciating slowness to avoid getting stuck. Ellie kept her eyes forward, afraid to look back at the settlement, afraid of what she might see if she did. The trail seemed to go on forever, winding through the ancient forest, climbing over roots and rocks that threatened to high-center their vehicle. Then, suddenly, they were out. The trail emerged onto a recognizable gravel road, and within minutes they reached the paved two-lane highway they had left earlier. Adam pulled over onto the shoulder and shut off the engine. They sat in silence for several minutes, both of them shaking, trying to process what had just happened. "We should report this," Ellie finally said. "That place, those people, something is not right there." "Report what exactly?" Adam asked. "That we got lost and found some weird settlement? That we drove in circles? They will think we are crazy." He had a point, but Ellie pulled out her phone anyway. The signal had returned, strong and clear, and the battery had jumped back to 72%, as if the previous reading had been some kind of error. She opened the map application and tried to find the location where they had been. The GPS showed their current position clearly, but when she scrolled back along their route, there was nothing. No settlement, no dirt road leading to it, just uninterrupted forest marked as protected wilderness area. Over the next few weeks, Ellie became obsessed with finding information about the settlement. She searched online for references to isolated communities in that part of Kentucky, for stories about people living off the grid in the Appalachian Mountains. She found plenty of general information about subsistence living and mountain culture, but nothing that matched what they had experienced. She even contacted the County Historical Society, describing the location as best she could, but they had no record of any settlement in that area. Adam wanted to forget about it, to move on and chalk it up to a strange experience they would never understand. But Ellie could not let it go. She had nightmares about the blank faces watching them, about the child with the dead animal, about driving in circles through a forest that refused to release them. In her dreams, they never found the exit, never encountered the old man who pointed the way out. In her dreams, they were still there, trapped in an endless loop, watched by those silent figures for eternity. 6 months later, Ellie read a news article about a group of hikers who had disappeared in the same general area where she and Adam had gotten lost. The hikers were experienced, well-equipped, and had filed a detailed itinerary with the Park Service. Search parties found no trace of them, no abandoned gear, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Ellie wondered if they had found the settlement, if they had made the same wrong turn, but had not been shown the way out. She never shared her suspicions with anyone except Adam, who still refused to discuss that afternoon in any detail. But Ellie kept the article, along with a folder of research she had compiled about similar disappearances in the Appalachian region over the decades. There were more than she had expected, a pattern of people vanishing without explanation in remote areas, leaving behind questions that were never answered. Ellie and Adam never returned to that part of Kentucky, never attempted another road trip through the Appalachian backroads. The experience had changed something fundamental in how they saw the world, had introduced the possibility that there were places where the normal rules did not apply, where modernity had never quite taken hold, where something old and unknowable still lingered. They preferred not to think about what might have happened if the old man had not shown them the way out, or what he had meant by his warning not to come back. Some questions, they had learned, were better left unanswered. Sadie considered herself an experienced road tripper. At 26 years old, she had driven across the country multiple times, usually alone, always with meticulous planning and preparation. She kept her car maintained, never let her gas tank drop below a quarter full, and always informed someone of her route and expected arrival time. These habits had served her well over the years, giving her the confidence to take on long journeys without fear or hesitation. But all the preparation in the world could not have readied her for what happened on a seemingly ordinary October afternoon in the Nevada desert. She was driving from Las Vegas to Reno to visit her college friend Maya, a trip she had made twice before without incident. The route was straightforward. Take Route 93 north through the desert, connect to Interstate 80, and arrive in Reno by early evening. Sadie had left Las Vegas at noon, stopping once for lunch at a diner in Alamo. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies and moderate temperatures, the kind of day that made desert driving pleasant rather than oppressive. Her car, a reliable Honda Civic that she had purchased new 2 years earlier, was running smoothly. She had a full tank of gas, her phone was charged, and she had even brought snacks and extra water in case of emergency. The last thing Sadie clearly remembered was checking the time on her dashboard clock. It read 2:45 p.m. She was approaching a particularly empty stretch of highway, with nothing visible in any direction except sagebrush and distant mountains. The radio was playing classic rock, and she was humming along to a Tom Petty song. She was about 80 miles from Reno, right on schedule to arrive by 5:30 p.m., as she had told Maya. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then there was nothing. Not darkness, not sleep, not even a sense of time passing. Just an absence, a gap in her consciousness that she could not account for. The next thing Sadie knew, she was sitting in her parked car on the side of a completely different highway, her engine running, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She blinked, confused, trying to orient herself. The sun was low on the horizon, creating long shadows across the landscape. She looked at the dashboard clock. It read 11:30 p.m. Sadie's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Nearly 9 hours had passed since her last clear memory. 9 hours that had simply vanished from her life, leaving behind no trace, no explanation, no memory of where she had been or what she had done. She looked around frantically, trying to recognize her surroundings. The road she was parked on was not Route 93. The landscape looked different, rockier and more mountainous. Her phone was on the passenger seat, completely dead despite being fully charged earlier. She grabbed it and tried to turn it on, but the screen remained black. Panic began to set in. Sadie checked herself for injuries, running her hands over her face and body, looking for any sign that something had happened to her during those missing hours. What she found only deepened her confusion and terror. Her clothes felt wrong. Her shirt was on backward, the tag rubbing against her collarbone in a way she would have noticed immediately under normal circumstances. Looking down, she realized her jeans were also on backward, the zipper in the wrong position. She pulled up her sleeves and saw dirt caked under her fingernails, dark earth that had not been there before. On her left forearm was a small circular burn mark, perhaps the size of a quarter, that she had no memory of receiving. It looked recent, the skin red and slightly blistered. The passenger seat was soaking wet, as if someone had poured water or some other liquid all over it. But Sadie traveled alone, had been alone when she last remembered checking the time. She leaned over and touched the wet fabric. It was cold and had a strange, almost metallic smell that she could not identify. Her water bottles were still sealed in the back seat, so whatever had soaked the seat had come from somewhere else. Sadie's gas gauge showed less than a quarter tank remaining, even though she had filled up that morning and should have had plenty to reach Reno. Quick mental calculation told her she had burned through at least 3/4 of a tank during those missing hours. At highway speeds, that represented somewhere between 150 and 200 miles of driving. But where had she gone? And who had driven there if not her? She tried to start the car to look for a landmark or sign, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the key. Finally, the engine turned over, and she carefully pulled back onto the highway. She drove for about 10 minutes before spotting a green road sign that identified her location. Highway 95, near the town of Tonopah. She pulled over again and tried to make sense of this. Tonopah was over 130 miles off her intended route, in the complete opposite direction from where she should have been heading. To get here from where she had been on Route 93, she would have had to exit the highway, navigate a series of smaller roads, and deliberately drive southeast instead of north. But Sadie had no memory of making any such decision or taking any such route. With her phone dead and unable to call for help, Sadie made the decision to drive to the nearest town. Tonopah appeared ahead after another 15 minutes, a small mining town that looked nearly deserted at this late hour. She pulled into a gas station that was still open, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, and went inside. A young clerk looked up from his phone as she entered. "Do you have a phone I can use?" Sadie asked, her voice sounding strange, even to her own ears. "It is an emergency." The clerk studied her face for a moment, something in her expression apparently convincing him this was serious. He handed her the store phone, and Sadie dialed Maya's number from memory. Her friend answered on the second ring, and the relief in her voice was immediately apparent. "Sadie, oh my God, where are you? I've been trying to call you for hours. I even called the police to report you missing." "I am in Tonopah," Sadie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Maya, something happened. I do not know what, but I lost almost 9 hours. I cannot remember anything." "What do you mean you lost 9 hours?" Maya's voice rose with concern. "Are you hurt? Do you need an ambulance?" "I do not know if I am hurt. I do not think so. But I need help." "Can you call the police here and have them come to the gas station?" Sadie gave her the address from the sign outside. Maya stayed on the phone with her until the Nye County Sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. Deputy Chen was a woman in her 40s with a professional demeanor that immediately made Sadie feel slightly safer. She took Sadie to the hospital in Tonopah, a small facility that was nonetheless equipped to handle basic medical emergencies. Over the next several hours, doctors examined Sadie thoroughly. They checked for signs of head trauma, drew blood to test for drugs and alcohol, performed a neurological examination, and documented the burn mark on her arm and the dirt under her fingernails. A sexual assault nurse examiner conducted an evaluation to determine if Sadie had been assaulted during the missing hours. Throughout all of this, Sadie answered questions as best she could, though her answers were frustratingly limited. She remembered everything clearly up until 2:45 p.m., then nothing until waking up in her car at 11:30 p.m. The blood work came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no substances that would explain a blackout of this magnitude. The neurological exam showed no signs of concussion or seizure activity. The burn mark was consistent with contact with a hot object, possibly metal, but its origin could not be determined. The dirt under her nails was ordinary soil, the kind found throughout the Nevada desert. The sexual assault examination was negative. By all medical accounts, Sadie was physically healthy, with no explanation for her missing time. Deputy Chen interviewed her extensively, taking detailed notes. She was particularly interested in the wet passenger seat and the fact that Sadie's clothes had been put on backward. "That is not the kind of thing someone does to themselves unconsciously," she noted. "Someone dressed you, or you dressed yourself, while not in your right mind." The deputy drove Sadie back to the gas station where her car was still parked. They examined it thoroughly, and Deputy Chen took photographs of the wet seat, documenting everything for her report. She checked the car's GPS history, but Sadie's older model did not have that feature. They looked for any other evidence, any clue about where Sadie had been during those missing hours, but found nothing conclusive. Deputy Chen arranged for Sadie's car to be towed to a secure lot for further examination, then drove her to a motel for the night. Maya arrived from Reno at 3 a.m., having dropped everything to make the drive. The two friends held each other and cried, and Sadie finally allowed herself to acknowledge the terror she had been suppressing since waking up in her car. Over the following weeks, investigators tried to piece together what had happened. They checked traffic cameras along Route 93 and Highway 95, looking for footage of Sadie's car. They found her vehicle on Route 93 near the spot where her memory ended, time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. The next sighting was on a remote desert road at 6:15 p.m., over 3 hours later, with no footage showing how she got there or where she had been in the intervening time. The final footage showed her car arriving in Tonopah at 11:28 p.m., consistent with when she regained consciousness. Deputies interviewed residents along the possible route Sadie might have taken, asking if anyone had seen her car or noticed anything unusual that afternoon. Most had seen nothing, but one elderly rancher reported seeing a car matching Sadie's description parked in a remote area about 20 miles outside Tonopah, near some old mining ruins. He had noticed it because it seemed out of place, a newer vehicle in an area rarely visited except by locals. He estimated the time as late afternoon, perhaps 5 Rust or 6 p.m. Investigators went to the location the rancher described and found tire tracks consistent with Sadie's vehicle. But there was nothing else. No evidence of what she might have been doing there or what might have happened to her. The mining ruins were unstable and dangerous, with open shafts and crumbling structures, but a search revealed nothing relevant to Sadie's case. Maya tried to convince Sadie to undergo hypnotherapy, suggesting that perhaps the memories were still there but buried in her subconscious. Sadie agreed, desperate for any answers. She saw a qualified therapist who specialized in recovered memories, participating in several sessions over the course of a month. But the hypnotherapy revealed nothing. Under hypnosis, Sadie's memory went from 2:45 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., with no transition, no hidden memories waiting to be uncovered. It was as if those hours had been completely erased from her mind. The case remained open, but unsolved. Deputy Chen told Sadie that without evidence of a crime or more information about what happened, there was little else they could do. The burn mark healed, leaving a faint circular scar that Sadie found herself touching unconsciously, a permanent reminder of a day that would never make sense. Sadie developed severe anxiety about driving, particularly through empty areas. She started having recurring nightmares about being in her car but unable to control it, unable to remember where she was going or why. In the dreams, hours would pass in seconds, and she would wake up in strange places with no memory of how she got there. She began seeing a therapist for what was diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder, though the trauma itself remained maddeningly undefined. Maya convinced Sadie to move to Reno permanently, unwilling to let her friend live alone after such an experience. Sadie took a job that did not require driving and sold her car, unable to sit in it without feeling a wave of irrational panic. She tried researching similar cases online and found a surprising number of stories from people who claimed to have experienced missing time, particularly in remote desert areas. Some attributed their experiences to alien abduction, others to government experiments, still others to unknown natural phenomena. Sadie did not know what to believe. All she knew for certain was that something had happened to her, something real and terrifying, and that she would never get those 9 hours back. The burn mark on her arm faded, but never completely disappeared. Sometimes, late at night, Sadie would stare at it and try to force herself to remember. But the memories refused to come, and perhaps that was for the best. Because sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, she would have a flash of something. Not a memory exactly, more like an impression. The sensation of being somewhere else, somewhere cold and bright and utterly wrong. And in those moments, she was grateful that she could not remember what had happened during those missing hours, because whatever the truth was, her mind had decided she was not meant to know it. Gavin and Lucy had been best friends since college, bonding over their shared love of adventure and their limited budgets. Now both 24 years old and working entry-level jobs in Seattle, they still preferred shoestring road trips to expensive resorts, finding joy in the journey rather than the destination. Their latest adventure was a drive down the Pacific coast, camping when possible and staying in budget motels when the weather turned bad. They had left Seattle 3 days earlier, working their way south through Oregon with no particular timeline or rigid itinerary. It was the kind of spontaneous travel they both loved, making decisions on the fly and embracing whatever came their way. But what came their way on the 4th night of their trip would test that carefree philosophy in ways neither of them could have anticipated. They had spent the day exploring the Oregon coast, hiking through state parks and stopping at scenic overlooks to photograph the dramatic coastline. By early evening, dark clouds had rolled in from the ocean, and a cold rain began to fall. Gavin checked his weather app and saw that the rain was expected to continue throughout the night, ruling out their plan to camp. they started looking for accommodation. But the coastal towns they passed through were either too expensive or fully booked due to some regional festival they had not known about. By 10 o'clock at night, they were still driving, their options dwindling with each passing mile. Finally, they spotted a neon sign glowing through the rain. Seaside Motor Lodge, vacancy. The motel looked like it had been built in the 1960s and not updated since. A single-story horseshoe of rooms around a parking lot with peeling paint and a sagging roof. But at this point, neither Gavin nor Lucy cared about aesthetics. They just wanted a dry place to sleep. The office was attached to what appeared to be the manager's residence, a small house with darkened windows. Inside, the office smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew. A television mounted on the wall played an old black and white western with the volume turned low. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a stained shirt, watching them with an expression that made Lucy uncomfortable for reasons she could not quite articulate. There was something in his eyes, a kind of intensity that did not match the casual setting. "We need a room for the night," Gavin said, pulling out his wallet. "2 beds if you have it." The clerk looked at Gavin, then at Lucy, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Only got 1 room left," he said slowly. 2 double beds. $75, cash only. Gavin and Lucy exchanged glances. They had stayed in plenty of cheap motels before, and $75 was within their budget, even if the place gave off questionable vibes. Gavin counted out the bills, and the clerk slid a key across the counter, attached to a large, plastic diamond keychain with the number 14 written in faded marker. "Last room on the end," the clerk said, pointing toward the far side of the parking lot. "Checkout is 11. They thanked him and hurried back to their car through the rain. As they drove to the far end of the property, Lucy watched the office in her side mirror. The clerk stood in the doorway, watching them, illuminated by the flickering neon sign. "That guy was creepy," she said to Gavin. "Yeah, but it is just for 1 night," Gavin replied, parking in front of room 14. "Tomorrow, we will find a better place." The room was exactly what they expected. Outdated furniture, thin carpets with mysterious stains, a smell of air freshener attempting to mask something less pleasant. But the beds looked clean enough, and the heater worked when Gavin turned it on. They brought in their bags and settled in for the night. Lucy took the bed closest to the bathroom, and Gavin took the one near the door. They were both exhausted from a full day of hiking and driving, and within 30 minutes, they had changed into sleeping clothes and turned off the lights. Lucy was not sure how long she had been asleep when something woke her. The room was dark except for a thin line of light coming from under the door. She lay still, listening, trying to identify what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard it. The sound of the doorknob turning slowly, the metal mechanism clicking quietly as someone tried to open the door from the outside. The chain lock held, stopping the door after it opened just an inch. But someone was definitely trying to get in. "Gavin," Lucy whispered urgently. "Gavin, wake up." Gavin stirred in the other bed. "What is wrong?" "Someone is trying to open our door." Gavin was instantly alert. He got up quietly and moved toward the door, looking through the peephole. "I do not see anyone," he whispered back. They waited in tense silence, but the doorknob did not turn again. After several minutes, Gavin returned to his bed, though neither of them went back to sleep immediately. Lucy kept replaying the sound in her mind, certain she had not imagined it. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and she dozed off, though her sleep was fitful and filled with anxious dreams. The next time she woke, it was to the sound of Gavin's voice, urgent and frightened. "Lucy, there is someone standing outside our door." She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. "What?" "Look at the shadow under the door. Someone is standing right there." Lucy looked where Gavin was pointing. In the thin line of light coming from under the door, she could clearly see the shadow of 2 feet, perfectly still, positioned right in front of their room. Whoever it was had been standing there silently, perhaps for minutes, perhaps longer. The shadow did not move, did not shift weight, just stood motionless in a way that was deeply unnatural. Gavin grabbed his phone and dialed the front desk. The phone rang, and rang with no answer. He tried again with the same result. The motel office, which should have had someone available for emergencies, was apparently unstaffed in the middle of the night. "Should we call the police?" Lucy asked, though she was not sure what they would report. Someone standing outside their motel room was not technically a crime. "Let me try opening the door and seeing who it is," Gavin said. "No," Lucy said quickly. "Do not open that door." They sat in the darkness, watching the shadow, neither of them sure what to do. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Then, at 3:17 a.m., according to Lucy's phone, the soft knocking started. Not loud, assertive knocking like someone who had a legitimate reason to be at their door, but barely audible tapping. The kind of sound someone makes when they are trying not to be heard by anyone except the people in the room that they are targeting. The knocking continued intermittently for the next hour and a half. A few taps, then silence for 10 or 15 minutes, then more tapping. The shadow never moved from its position. Gavin tried the front desk phone multiple times, but no one ever answered. They considered calling 911 but hesitated, unsure if what they were experiencing constituted an actual emergency. At 4:30 a.m., the knocking stopped, but the shadow remained. Gavin and Lucy sat on his bed, fully dressed now, their bags packed, ready to leave the moment it was light enough outside to feel safe making a run for their car. They did not talk much, just occasionally whispered observations to each other, confirming that yes, the shadow was still there, and no, it still had not moved. Then, at approximately 4:45 a.m., they heard the sound that would haunt Lucy's nightmares for years afterward. Someone outside their door was trying to use a key in the lock. They could hear it sliding in, hear the mechanism turning, and then the door pushed inward slightly, stopped only by the chain lock they had secured. Through the narrow gap, they caught a glimpse of a figure in what looked like a maintenance uniform, though the lighting was too poor to make out details. A voice came through the gap, low and almost conversational. "I know you are awake." Gavin found his voice. "Get away from our door or we are calling the police." The figure did not move. "I was just checking to make sure everything is all right in there, making sure you are comfortable." "We are fine," Gavin said, his voice steadier now. "Leave us alone." The door closed slowly, and the shadow disappeared from under the door. Gavin and Lucy remained frozen, listening to footsteps receding across the parking lot. They waited until they saw the first light of dawn through the curtains before they dared to leave the room. Gavin went out first, checking the area. Then they threw their bags in the car and drove directly to the front office. A different person was working the morning shift, a woman in her 60s who looked surprised to see them up so early. When they explained what had happened, her expression changed from surprise to something that looked like resignation, mixed with concern. "I need to check the logs," she said, pulling out a binder. "What time did you check in?" "Around 10 last night," Lucy said. The clerk who was here was a middle-aged man, thin, wearing a stained gray shirt. The woman looked up sharply. There was no one scheduled to work the desk last night after 9 p.m. I locked up myself before I left. Gavin and Lucy exchanged alarmed glances. Then who checked us in? Gavin asked. The woman flipped through the registration book. You are not even listed here. There is no record of anyone checking into room 14 last night. Lucy felt her stomach drop. We paid cash, $75. Let me review the security footage, the woman said, moving to a computer behind the counter. She pulled up the recording, and they watched the timestamp from the previous night. The footage showed Gavin and Lucy pulling up, entering the office, then leaving several minutes later. But there was no one behind the counter. No clerk, no one taking their money. On the video, Gavin appeared to set cash on the counter and pick up a key, but he was alone in the office. That is impossible, Gavin said. There was definitely someone there. He gave us the key. The woman's expression was troubled. I believe you saw someone, she said carefully. This is not the first time something like this has happened. We have had complaints before, always about room 14, always about someone standing outside the door trying to get in. The owner insists there is a logical explanation, but several employees have quit because of incidents in that room. She refunded them their money, apologized profusely, and gave them the corporate contact information for filing a formal complaint. But Gavin and Lucy were already backing toward the door, wanting nothing more than to be away from the Seaside Motor Lodge as quickly as possible. They drove for an hour before stopping for breakfast at a busy diner, needing to be around normal people in a well-lit space. Over coffee and pancakes, they tried to make sense of what had happened. The security footage showing an empty office was impossible to reconcile with their clear memory of the creepy clerk. The voice through the door saying, "I know you are awake," played on repeat in Lucy's mind. Gavin reported the incident to the local police later that day, and an officer told them they would investigate. Several weeks after returning home, Gavin received a call from a detective asking for more details. The detective mentioned that other guests had reported similar experiences, and that when the maintenance uniform was checked, the employee who was supposed to have it claimed it had been stolen from his locker months earlier, but he had never reported it because he assumed he had just misplaced it. The case went nowhere. No charges were filed, no arrests made. The Seaside Motor Lodge continued to operate, and according to online reviews that Lucy obsessively checked for months afterward, people continued to report strange experiences in room 14. Some reviews mentioned shadows under the door, others described feeling watched, and a few mentioned someone trying to enter their room in the middle of the night. Gavin and Lucy never did another budget road trip. They saved money and stayed at reputable chain hotels after that, willing to pay extra for the peace of mind that came with professional security and well-lit parking lots. But Lucy still struggled with hotels in general, always double-checking the chain lock, always positioning furniture against the door, always sleeping poorly in unfamiliar places. The experience had taught her that some dangers could not be locked out, that some threats wore the disguise of ordinary circumstances, and that the difference between a safe night and a nightmare could be as simple as choosing the wrong motel at the wrong time. Connor and Isla had always been close despite the 3-year age gap between them. Connor, 24, had recently graduated with his engineering degree, while Isla, 21, was finishing her final year at the University of Texas. When their grandmother passed away in Arizona, they decided to make the drive together from Austin to attend the funeral, then stay a few extra days to help their mother sort through the estate. The drive to Arizona had been uneventful, filled with the kind of comfortable conversation and shared music playlists that came from growing up together. But the drive back would be something entirely different. Something that would fundamentally change how both of them felt about highway travel after dark. They left Phoenix at 8 in the evening, later than they had planned, but not concerning given that Connor had always been comfortable with overnight driving. The route would take them east through New Mexico and back into Texas. A drive of approximately 14 hours if they did not stop for more than fuel and bathroom breaks. Isla had offered to take shifts driving, and they had worked out a system where they would trade off every 2 hours to keep each other alert and engaged. The first few hours passed without incident, the highway stretching ahead of them through the dark desert landscape, occasional towns appearing and disappearing in clusters of light. Around 2 in the morning, somewhere in the vast emptiness of West Texas, Connor noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. This was not unusual in itself. Even on remote stretches of highway, vehicles appeared occasionally, though at this hour the traffic was sparse. What caught his attention was how quickly the headlights were approaching. The vehicle was moving significantly faster than the 70 miles per hour Connor was maintaining, and within a minute it had closed the distance and was directly behind them. Connor expected the vehicle to pass, as faster drivers typically did. Instead, it matched his speed, staying about 2 car lengths behind them. The headlights were positioned high, suggesting a truck or large SUV, and they were bright enough to illuminate the interior of Connor's sedan uncomfortably. He adjusted his rearview mirror to deflect the glare and continued driving, assuming the other driver would eventually pass. But after 5 minutes, the vehicle was still there, maintaining the exact same distance and speed. Connor accelerated slightly, bringing his speed up to 75. The vehicle behind them accelerated as well, keeping that same 2-car length gap. Connor slowed back down to 70, and the pursuing vehicle matched that change immediately. "That is weird," Isla said from the passenger seat, where she had been half dozing. She was fully awake now, watching the headlights in her side mirror. "Why are they following us like that?" "Probably just someone being annoying," Connor said, though his grip on the steering wheel valves had tightened. "Let me see if they will pass." He moved into the right lane, slowing to 65. The vehicle behind them changed lanes as well, still maintaining that precise distance. They drove like this for another 2 miles, and Connor felt his unease growing into something closer to fear. This was not random behavior. Someone was deliberately pacing them, matching their every move with a precision that suggested intent. The black sedan, which Connor could now see more clearly in his mirrors, suddenly accelerated and pulled alongside them in the left lane. Connor glanced over, trying to see the driver, but the windows were heavily tinted, revealing nothing but darkness. The sedan matched their speed exactly, staying parallel to them for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. Then it pulled slightly ahead, perhaps 10 feet, and hit its brakes. Connor had to brake hard to avoid rear-ending the sedan, which had positioned itself directly in front of them and was now slowing dramatically. The sedan decelerated from 70 miles per hour down to 40, then 30, forcing Connor to slow with it or risk a collision. As soon as Connor slowed, the sedan accelerated again, pulling ahead and then falling back to pace them once more from behind. "What are they doing?" Isla asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Connor, this is not normal." "I know," Connor said. He was trying to stay calm, to think rationally about their options. They were on a stretch of highway with no exits visible, no other vehicles in sight, and no clear way to escape whoever was playing this dangerous game with them. The pattern repeated. The sedan would pull alongside them, then ahead, then brake suddenly forcing Connor to slow. Then it would fall back, pace them from behind for a few minutes, and start the cycle again. Each iteration felt more threatening than the last. Once, when the sedan pulled alongside them, the passenger window rolled down slightly. But it was too dark, and they were moving too fast for Connor to see anything inside except what might have been a hand emerging briefly before retreating. On the fourth cycle, when the sedan pulled ahead and brake-checked them again, Connor noticed something that made his blood run cold. The hand that appeared from the passenger window was pointing directly at them, then pointing ahead down the highway, as if directing them to follow or indicating something waiting for them up ahead. The gesture was deliberate and clearly meant as some form of communication or threat. "Call 911, Connor told Isla, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Right now." Isla pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She dialed and put the phone on speaker so Connor could hear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and Isla tried to explain their situation, but her words came out jumbled and panicked. Connor took over, keeping his eyes on the road and the sedan that was now pacing them from behind again. "We are on Interstate 10 eastbound," Connor said, reading off the last mile marker he could remember. "A black sedan with tinted windows has been following us, brake-checking us, and acting threateningly for the past 15 minutes. We need help." The dispatcher asked for their exact location, description of their vehicle, and kept them on the line while she coordinated with State Highway Patrol. Connor estimated they were somewhere between Fort Stockton and Ozona, a desolate stretch of Texas highway known for its long distances between towns. The dispatcher informed them that the nearest patrol unit was approximately 20 minutes away, but was responding with lights and sirens. As if the driver of the sedan had heard the 911 call, the harassment immediately intensified. The sedan accelerated past them again, but this time it did not brake-check them. Instead, it moved into their lane about 50 feet ahead and came to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. Connor saw the brake lights illuminate and had perhaps 2 seconds to react. He swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding a collision, his tires squealing as he fought to maintain control at highway speed. "They are trying to make us crash," Isla shouted, the phone clutched in her hand as the dispatcher asked urgently what was happening. Connor made a split-second decision. He saw an exit ramp approaching on the right, an exit that led to nothing according to the empty landscape around them, no lights visible in any direction. Under normal circumstances, he would never take such an exit, especially not at this hour. But staying on the highway with the sedan meant continued danger, and at least an exit ramp might offer opportunities to evade or hide. He cut hard to the right, taking the exit at a speed that made his car lean alarmingly. The sedan, which had been behind them again, followed immediately. The exit ramp led to a 2-lane road that disappeared into darkness. Connor accelerated hard, pushing his sedan to 80, then 90 miles per hour. The black sedan matched his speed effortlessly, its more powerful engine allowing it to close the gap until it was right on their bumper. Then it did something that still haunts Connor's nightmares. It started flashing its high beams in a rapid, almost strobe-like pattern, the light filling their car with a disorienting brightness that made it difficult to see the road ahead. Isla was crying now, still on the phone with the dispatcher who was trying to guide them back toward the highway and toward the approaching patrol unit. But the sedan was blocking any attempt to turn around, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into nowhere. Connor was pushing his car as fast as he dared on an unfamiliar road in complete darkness, hyper-aware that a single pothole or sharp curve could send them crashing. Then, in his rearview mirror, Connor saw the most beautiful sight of his life. Red and blue flashing lights In the distance behind them, approaching rapidly, the highway patrol unit that had been dispatched was closing in, and apparently the sedan driver saw it too. The black sedan immediately dropped back, cut its lights entirely, and made a sharp turn onto what must have been a side road or dirt path. Within seconds, it had vanished into the darkness as if it had never been there. Connor slowed and pulled over onto the shoulder, his whole body shaking with adrenaline. The patrol car pulled up behind them, and a Texas state trooper approached their window with his hand near his weapon, clearly prepared for a dangerous situation. Connor and Isla poured out their story, the trooper taking notes and radioing for additional units to search the area. Officer Martinez, a veteran trooper with 15 years of experience, told them this was not an isolated incident. Over the past 6 months, there had been multiple reports of similar harassment on this stretch of I-10, always at night, always involving a dark-colored sedan with tinted windows. The pattern matched what law enforcement had started calling highway games, where individuals or groups would target random drivers for what appeared to be entertainment, forcing them into dangerous situations and terrorizing them for miles before disappearing. "You did the right thing calling immediately," Officer Martinez said. "Some victims try to handle it themselves, try to outrun the other vehicle, and it ends badly. We have had accidents. We have had people driven off the road. You were smart to stay on the line with dispatch." He escorted Connor and Isla back to the highway and followed them for the next 40 miles to ensure their safety. Other patrol units searched for the black sedan but found nothing. Connor's dashcam had captured some of the incident, though the footage was dark and the sedan's license plate was not visible in any of the frames. The footage was turned over to law enforcement as evidence in an ongoing investigation. Connor and Isla made it back to Austin as the sun was rising, exhausted and traumatized. Neither of them had any desire to ever drive that stretch of highway again. And for months afterward, both experienced anxiety whenever headlights appeared behind them on dark roads. Connor installed additional cameras in his car, always kept his gas tank full, and made it a rule never to drive overnight unless absolutely necessary. Isla developed a fear of highway driving at night that led her to plan trips differently, always stopping at hotels before dark, always choosing routes with frequent towns and services rather than isolated stretches. The investigation into the highway harassment continued for over a year. Several suspects were questioned, and police eventually connected the incidents to a group of thrill seekers who had been targeting lone drivers as part of what they considered a game. Arrests were made, though whether those arrested were responsible for Connor and Isla's specific encounter remained unclear. What was clear was that the siblings had survived something that could easily have ended in tragedy, that their quick thinking and immediate call to 911 had likely saved their lives. They shared their story publicly, hoping to warn other drivers about the dangers of highway harassment and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior immediately. Because sometimes, the scariest encounters on the road are not accidents or mechanical failures, but the deliberate actions of people who find entertainment in terrorizing strangers, turning a simple drive home into a fight for survival. Henry and Amelia were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary with a road trip through the countryside. A return to the simpler pleasures that had defined their early relationship. At 33 and 31 respectively, they had built comfortable lives in Chicago. But both felt they had lost something along the way in the rush of careers and responsibilities. This trip, planned for late September of 1997, was meant to recapture that sense of adventure and spontaneity they had shared when they first met. They deliberately left their pagers at home, brought only a paper road atlas, and set out with nothing but a general direction and a promise to embrace whatever came their way. What came their way would challenge everything they thought they understood about reality. The trip had been wonderful up until that Saturday afternoon. They had spent 5 days wandering through small towns in Illinois and Iowa, staying at bed and breakfasts, eating at local diners, and talking in ways they had not talked in years. They were heading toward a historic inn they had read about in a travel guide, somewhere in the rolling hills of eastern Iowa, when they encountered the detour sign. It was a standard orange construction sign with a black arrow. Road work ahead, detour. Henry slowed and followed the arrow onto a secondary road, a 2-lane route that wound through farmland and patches of forest. Neither of them was concerned. Detours were a normal part of highway travel, especially in rural areas where infrastructure was constantly being maintained and updated. Another sign appeared after a quarter mile, another arrow directing them to turn right. Then another sign and another, each one appearing just when they needed direction, leading them deeper into the countryside. "This is taking us pretty far off course," Amelia observed after they had been following detour signs for about 20 minutes. She was trying to track their position on the road atlas, but the secondary and tertiary roads they were being directed down were not clearly marked on the map. "These rural detours can be long," Henry said. "I am sure we will loop back to the highway soon enough." But the roads kept getting smaller. The well-maintained 2-lane gave way to a narrower road with rougher pavement. Then that turned into gravel. The detour signs continued to appear at regular intervals, always pointing them forward, never offering an option to turn back toward the highway they had left. The landscape remained the same. Fields and forest, the occasional farmhouse in the distance, everything bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. After another 15 minutes, Henry noticed something that made him slow the car. They had just passed a particularly distinctive oak tree, massive and gnarled, standing alone in a field. But he was certain he had seen that exact tree earlier, perhaps 10 minutes ago. He mentioned it to Amelia, who had been studying the map with increasing frustration. "That is impossible," she said. "We have been driving in a straight line for the last 20 minutes. How could we pass the same tree twice?" They continued, but 5 minutes later, there was the tree again. Unmistakable, with its distinctive split trunk in the way it leaned slightly to the left. This time, both of them saw it clearly, and both knew they had passed it before. Henry pulled over onto the shoulder of the gravel road and shut off the engine. "Something is wrong," he said quietly. "We are going in circles." Amelia checked the odometer. They had traveled over 30 miles since leaving the highway, yet their position relative to landmarks suggested they had covered far less ground. "Let me check something," she said, looking at her watch. It read 4:45 p.m. But that could not be right. When they had first encountered the detour sign, Amelia was certain it had been around 4:30. They had been following the detour for at least 45 minutes, probably closer to an hour. But only 15 minutes had passed, according to her watch. Henry checked his own watch. It showed the same time. He looked at the car clock, which had always been accurate. It also read 4:45. But the sun's position in the sky suggested it should be much later, closer to 6 or even 7 in the evening, based on how low it hung on the horizon. "Maybe our watches stopped," Amelia suggested, though her voice betrayed her doubt. They got out of the car to look around, to try to get their bearings. The moment they stepped onto the gravel road, they both noticed the silence. It was absolute. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling through the trees. Even the sounds they themselves made seemed muffled, as if the air was absorbing noise rather than allowing it to travel. Henry clapped his hands together sharply. The sound was flat and lifeless, dying immediately rather than echoing across the open fields. "Get back in the car," Amelia said, and there was something in her voice that made Henry immediately comply. They locked the doors, though neither could have explained what they were locking them against, and Henry started the engine again. "We are going back," he said firmly. "Forget the detour. We are turning around and retracing our route." He executed a 3-point turn on the narrow gravel road and started driving back the way they had come. But within minutes, they encountered another detour sign, this one directing them to turn left. Henry ignored it and continued straight. The road ahead seemed to grow narrower, the trees pressing closer on both sides. After a quarter mile, the road ended abruptly in a wall of vegetation, so dense it was impassable. There had been no such dead end when they had come this way just minutes before. Henry reversed and went back to the detour sign. This time he followed the arrow, turning left onto a path he did not remember seeing on the way out. The pattern repeated several more times over the next 30 minutes. Every attempt to deviate from the detour signs led to dead ends or roads that looped back to the same intersections. It was as if the landscape itself was conspiring to keep them on a predetermined path, allowing no escape from the route that had been laid out. The sun remained frozen on the horizon, neither rising nor setting, casting everything in that same golden light that was beginning to feel less beautiful and more ominous with each passing minute. The watches had not moved from 4:45, though the car's trip odometer showed they had now driven over 60 miles since leaving the highway. "This cannot be happening," Amelia said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Roads do not just disappear. The sun does not stay in one place. Something is very wrong, Henry." As if in response to her words, they rounded a curve and found themselves approaching the distinctive oak tree again. The third time, or perhaps the fourth. Henry had lost count. But this time, something was different. Standing next to the tree was a detour sign, freshly placed, its arrow pointing to the right, down a path that Henry was certain had not existed the previous times they had passed this spot. He stopped the car, and they sat staring at the sign, neither of them wanting to acknowledge what they both knew. They had no choice but to follow it. Every other option had been exhausted. Every other route had led back to the same point or to impassable dead ends. Whatever was happening, whatever strange phenomenon they had become trapped in, the only way out seemed to be forward. Henry turned right as directed. The path was barely more than 2 tire tracks through grass, narrow and overgrown. Tree branches scraped against the sides of their car, and Henry drove slowly, afraid of getting stuck or damaging the vehicle. The path continued for what felt like miles, but was probably less than one, winding through increasingly dense forest that blocked out even that strange, frozen sunlight. Then, suddenly, they emerged onto pavement. Smooth, modern asphalt with fresh yellow lines. A highway. Henry stopped at the edge, looking both directions. The highway stretched away in both directions, completely empty of traffic. But there was something familiar about it. Amelia pulled out the atlas and compared landmarks visible in the distance. "This is it," she said, her voice shaking. "This is the original highway. This is exactly where we were when we first saw the detour sign." Henry pulled onto the highway, heading in the direction they had originally been traveling. Within 100 yards, they reached the spot where the detour sign should have been. There was nothing there. No sign, no orange barrels, no indication of any construction or road work. The highway was clear and perfect. recently repaved based on how smooth it was. They drove in silence for the next 30 minutes, neither of them willing to talk about what had just happened until they were well away from that area. When they finally stopped at a gas station in a town they recognized from their atlas, the reality of the situation hit them. Amelia's watch now showed 7:15 p.m. The car clock matched it. They had left the highway around 4:30 and were now returning to it nearly 3 hours later, though their subjective experience felt both longer and shorter than that, in ways that made no sense. The attendant at the gas station was a friendly older man who chatted with them while he filled their tank. The era before self-service had become universal. Henry casually asked if there was any construction on the highway they had just left. "Highway 20?" the attendant said. "No, nothing. They just finished repaving that whole stretch last month. Smooth as glass now. Why, did you have trouble?" Henry and Amelia exchanged glances. "No," Henry said. "No trouble." They drove the rest of the way to their destination in a daze, checking into the historic inn well after dark. Over dinner in their room, they finally tried to make sense of what had happened. They looked at the atlas together, trying to identify the roads they had been on during those missing hours. But the problem was clear. Based on the area they had been in, there simply were not enough roads to account for 60 miles of driving. The region was too small, the road network too limited. Amelia suggested they drive back the next day, try to retrace their route, see if they could find that oak tree or any of the roads they had been directed down. But Henry refused. There was something in his gut, some primal instinct, that told him returning to that area would be a mistake. They had been shown a way out once. He was not confident they would be so lucky a second time. They never did go back. They finished their anniversary trip, returned to Chicago, and tried to resume normal life. But the experience left scars. Henry developed an aversion to detours, always choosing to sit in traffic rather than follow alternative routes. Amelia stopped wearing a watch, unable to look at the time without remembering those frozen hours. They never took another road trip together, both of them finding excuses whenever the subject came up. Years later, after GPS had become common, Henry tried to find the location where they had encountered the detour using satellite imagery. He searched for that distinctive oak tree, for the intersection where the detour had begun, for any evidence that would confirm or explain what they had experienced. He found nothing. The area showed only standard roads, normal farmland, nothing unusual or unexplained. It was as if those roads they had been trapped on had never existed, or perhaps existed only temporarily, only for them. Henry and Amelia rarely talked about that day, even with each other. But sometimes, late at night, one of them would wake from a dream of driving endlessly through unfamiliar landscape, following signs that led nowhere, trapped in a loop that defied logic and geography. And in those moments, they would reach for each other in the darkness, grateful to be home, grateful to be stationary, grateful that whatever they had encountered on those roads had chosen to let them go.